Hello everybody and welcome to another edition of the Wisdom of the World Show. I'm your host, Jack Butler. Thanks for joining us. The Wisdom of the World Show is where we bring you the world's leading hearts, minds and souls and give them a platform to share their wisdom with you. I'm excited to have today's guest, Patricia Albere. Patricia is an internationally recognized contemporary spiritual teacher, passionate about creating a new paradigm for a higher order of human relatedness. Her work awakens others to the profound depths and infinite wisdom accessed by way of two or more people connected to a larger and more powerful evolutionary force. Her work with collective fields of consciousness has been developed through continuous work with groups and now over 150,000 people internationally. She's the founder of the Evolutionary Collective, a new model for awakened community. She's also the host of the popular Evolutionary Collective Conversations, a global webcast in which today's top evolutionary leaders are brought together. She teaches evolutionary relationships, an initial 7-week course that allows people to step into a new way of relating. She recently brought the EC model into joint partnership with philosopher, teacher and writer Jeff Carrera, a longtime student and colleague of spiritual evolutionary Andrew Cohen. She resides in New York City and Santa Fe and is currently writing a book on evolutionary relationships. Patricia, great to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. So you've got such a rich history, so I'm wanting to delve into that a bit to kick off. I know that we were saying just on our kind of pre-call that you were drawn to San Francisco early in your life. Tell us a bit about what was the kind of impulse there, and also what you got involved in the kind of personal growth world.
Well, I mean, it started at 15, living in New York and going to Woodstock, not knowing why I was compelled to be there, but somehow I had to go, and I went. And then something else, I just kept feeling like instead of the usual route of going to college, I intended to go later, but I didn't feel like I could go right away. There was something else, so I decided to go to San Francisco with my hippie boyfriend. Which is what people were doing from New York.
Yes.
And when I got there, within a few months, a friend of ours that was also had gone to high school with us told me about Werner Erhard. And so that was in it was like I took the training in June 71. So it was a year after I graduated from high school. And I was one of the first 100 people that ever did the work of EST, which is now called the Landmark Forum,
yes,
where I think over 3 million people have participated in the work in the last 40 years. So,
wow.
It just, to me, I was going to go to art school eventually, San Francisco Art Institute, and when I met him and I did the training, I just was I felt like I was looking for something more than just normal life.
Yes.
And for me, I was just so blown away. I asked him for a job, and he was kind enough to give this, long-haired hippie girl. He hired me, and I didn't know how to do anything. I mean, I was relatively useless. But he saw, I guess, some promise.
I'm sure. And
I worked with him and was very much a part of making that whole movement happen for the first 12 years. I was in charge of enrollment. So I'd get up in front of Lincoln Center and talk to thousands of people and inspire them to transform their lives. So it was pretty exciting and a great place to get a lot of training.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, where do you kind of sit with EST or Landmark today? How much of that do you still feel is kind of is relevant work for people, or do you feel it's sort of something you need to do to get to a certain platform, and then kind of other things need to develop you from there?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. There's a groundedness in the work. Mm-hmm. They have their faults, things that I didn't like 20 years ago or 30 years ago. But there's a power in what they do that really gets people to get beyond their own selfish self-concern.
Yes.
And also to realize that integrity matters, and walking your talk, and having courage when it comes to forgiving and loving and letting go of all your positions and all the things that are keeping your life stuck and small.
Yes.
So people, I think, get a kind of courageousness and integrity that I think is quite, and self-responsibility that is really powerful and useful. And some people that have had spiritual paths for 20 years don't always get that.
Yes.
You know, they always get that part.
Yes.
So I think it's extremely useful for that. And they have more subtle programs and things that are great. For me, having really been living it for 12 years, you know, so I was 18 when I started, and I was 30 when I left.
Yes.
You know, I was leading seminars and doing things. I felt like it's in my bones. You know, I mean, it's just, I'm so shaped by that in a fundamental way. And there's also a quality of, like, Werner really didn't care about, you know, he was brilliant, and he was a brilliant philosopher, knew Heidegger, and, you know, all the various, I mean, you could talk to him, he's a genius.
Yes.
But what he cared about was giving people direct access. So if your work or your conversation or your book or your whatever doesn't give people access to what you're talking about in a way that changes their lives, he didn't care. It was like, whatever, you know, it was irrelevant to him. So he was a pragmatist, probably at the you know, at the highest order.
Yes.
And so I feel like I have that. I have a very pragmatist kind of perspective. And, you know, even in the we space, you know, which is now a thing.
Yes.
Which is an evolutionary thing. For me, if people aren't in fact really altered, that their consciousness is altered, and that they are truly changing in a way that their sense of unity and, you know, self-centeredness is dissolving, then it doesn't matter how many practices you do or how many cool theories you've got or how many quadrants you can divide it into. You know, if it isn't for real, you know, if you can't taste that on the person, then they're not getting it yet. Do you know what I mean? It's really happening. And so I do still have that, obviously, in a strong way.
Yeah. Yeah, I like what you say there, because it strikes me that one of the risks of the spiritual path, or people who spend a lot of time focusing on that, is that the things that the personal growth movement can be really strong on, such as integrity, responsibility, showing up, you know, walking the talk, that those things can sometimes get bypassed, or they can almost get lessened in importance, because, you know, what's going on in this world is sometimes seen as it's kind of like less important than what, you know, might be beyond it or something. So so okay, so you have the S piece. Then what else would you say has been really relevant to kind of shaping you and your worldview and the kind of work that you do, which is what we'll get onto?
Well, the second biggest piece, I mean, besides I was pregnant with my son when I left staff, so he definitely has shaped me, you know, becoming a mother.
Yeah, wow.
Makes a difference. But for me, the second biggest influence was I came across Rajneesh, Osho.
Ah, yes.
Which was the opposite. You know, it seemed like it was the counter opposite to word, you know, where it was all about joy and celebration and this sort of deep sensuality and oneness and, you know, whatever. So I went and did that, which was a complete, you know, shock to my system.
Yes. Was that when he was in the US? Or,
yes. Yeah. I was there for the finale. So I showed up for the last 3 months of him being there.
Wow. That must have been an interesting time, because I know there was like police investigations and like crazy. Ronald Reagan was annoyed with him and deportation. Yeah. And
no, there was all kinds of stuff. But it went from he was speaking, he had been in silence. So I got there as soon as he started talking until he was deported.
Right.
So I was there for the whole finale. And but I met, for me, more importantly, there was a young mystic, a German, who was 8 years younger than I was, and was very so meditative, so mystical, and so handsome, and like insanely gorgeous man, you know, that was just, and knew how to be a man, you know, he really was like, whoa. So he sort of undid me, as far as, like, I fell in love with him, but I didn't totally take it seriously at first, because I'd been very powerful and, you know, had done all this stuff. And he just completely undid me in the biggest way. And then we fell in love, and he, H. Almas does who I also studied with later.
Yes.
talks with Cynthia Bourgeault,
Yes.
someone I interviewed, and about this thing he calls the unibeing,
Yep.
which I think is interesting.
Just say what that is.
Well, he gave it a language. It's what I experienced with Peter was that we really were one being. I mean, it didn't make sense. It wasn't just romantic. It wasn't just juicy. It wasn't just profoundly spiritual. It wasn't just tantric. It was like there was something that neither one of us, there was some pattern that we were made of together.
Yeah.
And psychically, we were always connected. And the love and the yes, we had this yes to each other that was yes, just yes, absolute, no games. I mean, there was a certain wholeheartedness that you don't see.
Yeah.
And so in the yes, and in the way that we were turned towards each other, and obviously what we were also given sort of karmically as a gift, there was this opening that kept happening and happening and happening and happening, and we were awakening together. So you have two non-enlightened people with a very big yes, and then there was something that was happening that was literally creating an awakening and demanding surrender and demanding all the things that any kind of spiritual teacher demands from a disciple.
Yes.
And it was 24/7 and 24/7 and 24/7. So we had 3.5 years of that, and we would exist in certain, we were just in an altered state. I mean, it was, we'd be human and crazy, and then it would just the thing would open and we would just be someplace else and different things would start to happen. And so
wow.
He, unfortunately, he asked me to marry him, and 2 weeks later, he was in a car accident and was brain injured very badly. Oh. And within 2 years, he died. So it was the nightmare, of nightmares, because being so intensely connected and then getting ripped apart.
Wow.
And still staying connected. Mm-hmm. So the connection is still there. I mean, I was working in Philadelphia this weekend and New York the weekend before, teaching the Evolutionary Collective with Jeff, and
yeah.
And there's a space that happens in the room, and people come together, and it feels like Peter and I. It feels like there's this space of the beloved that is so palpable. I can feel him. I mean, he's just there. It's like he's still doing the work.
Yeah.
Obviously with me and with Jeff and with everyone. So he completely changed my life, because the awakening that is still there, which was a dual awakening,
yes.
I was sort of left with and had my roomy experience.
Yes. And continue,
I mean, obviously, it's something you never get over.
Yeah.
So wow. I would say, yeah. So I feel like finally, to be really honest, the work that we're doing, I feel, because I never could, besides that I was the mother of my son, and, mm-hmm. He needed to grow up, and, he was 7 years old when Peter was gone. I kept going, okay, why am I here? And, I kept teaching and working, but something was still what's the point? I mean, I experienced something that's so extraordinary, and normal relating is so,
dull.
Really, egoic relating.
Yes.
So frustrating isn't the word for my experience. It was a kind of suffering, actually, to some degree. And then about 8 years ago, I started getting this inkling that something, finally, 40 years ago when I met Werner, it was like, wow, there's something happening on the planet. And then it's just been sort of more of the same, sort of more a filling in of different teachings and teachers and people. And I felt like something was cooking again. And it's this intersubjective awakening that I experienced with Peter. Yeah. It's like the planet, the people that are ready, there's something that can happen, and now I know why I'm still here.
Yep. Cool.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
yeah, let's
so that's
let's dig right into that. So like
have a certain kind of opus, sense of this is my
this
opus.
is it. Yeah. Well, so tell us more about that. I mentioned in the intro that you're talking about a kind of new form of relatedness, and we've got, I
Yeah.
guess, a sense when you talk about sort of Rumi and the beloved. People may have a sense of that. Could you just talk a little bit more to the essence of the work that you do now? And kind of like a little bit how it works, and if you sense why it works, and how it's different.
Yeah, sure. Well, one of the things that I discovered, and I was able to, I mean, the way I work is I always have experiences
Yes.
that I can't make any sense out of.
Yes.
And then I'm left with, okay, how do I make sense out of
Yes.
this? What happened? And
What the hell happened there?
why and where and how? And, so for me, what I realized was with Peter, besides the karmic element of being the grace that was given,
Yes.
it's that kind of chemistry, and the whole thing was just like ridiculous. It was just kind of off the charts. But and our ages were right, and all of that. Is I realized that in mutuality. So if you're a spiritual teacher, right, and you're awakened, and you're completely awakened, if I surrender to you, if I continue to be, not in the way,
Yes.
there's a transmission that can occur where I can literally awaken.
Yes.
Okay, but it's not mutual.
Correct.
I mean, you're embodying something I don't have.
You're aspiring. Yes.
And I'm potentially available, but my awakening doesn't necessarily alter your awakening.
Yes.
Okay. So I realized that we had something that was mutual.
Yep.
And then I started looking at, well, what's the nature of mutuality, like real mutuality? And I noticed that mutuality is mostly missing.
Yes.
I mean, the awareness of real mutuality is missing.
Do you mean
in most people's lives?
Okay, you mean even in sort of like everyday relationships?
In everyday relationships, I mean, to the degree that mutuality being, I'm beautiful and you're rich, I mean, that's, I consider that a trade.
Yes.
That's more a mutual using each other, which
Right.
is distinct from mutuality, which is a confluence of our souls, a kind of meeting that we you awaken, I awaken, you're deepened, I'm deepened. There's something actually happening between us. And then I started looking at what's necessary then. And I realized that number one was Peter and I you need two people that are relatively similar in capacity.
Yep. And would you be naming any specific capacities there?
Could be, lines and levels. It could be anything. I mean, so if you want true mutuality, so if you and I are intellectually similarly open and have a certain amount of capacity and interest, we can start exchanging ideas, and it gets very electric. When you're sharing from the mind, there's like this electrical energy where you sort of get all excited.
Yes.
But if we're really open, what we can do is open our minds, and we can get to a point where we don't know where we're going.
Yep.
It's no longer where we've been. It's like we get to the point where something can begin to use us.
Yes.
Because we have, just like if we were tennis players, you were saying that you like to play tennis.
Aspiring, yes.
Aspiring, okay. If you were to play tennis with me, there would be no mutuality, because I'm like, I can hardly play tennis. It's like a joke, right?
Yes.
So you could teach me how to play tennis,
yes.
but nothing new is going to happen. We're not going to like new heights of where tennis can go.
Yes.
Okay, no breakthroughs are going to happen. But if you and I were professional tennis players,
yes,
and we continued to play together, we might actually get to a place where something new could actually happen, not just for each of us, but for tennis itself.
Yes. That's
and
exciting.
so I realized that if you set it up, if you want to work with people in this kind of, if you want to potentiate,
yes,
the way that Peter and I were potentiated, you need to get people together that's not a one-room schoolhouse. You need to get them together with, a similar level of capacity,
yep,
openness, commitment, You know, real willingness, not people that just want to tell each other what they already know.
Yes.
You know, or demonstrate how open their hearts can be. You know, I mean, you have to be really humble and open and willing to go places you've never been before. And so I came up with, there are like 10 different elements of evolutionary mutuality that when those things are present, they actually activate the potentials of where we can go together so that we meet.
Yes.
And eventually that we can be taken where no one has gone.
Cool.
And that it gets really cool.
Yeah.
So that's part of what you know, we've got, Jeff and I are working with people, and it isn't just like, you know, whoever wants to come. It's really inviting people to come and work with us that are really serious and really want to be inspirational to one another.
Yes.
And are really ready to discover what's possible between people, which activates their potential too, but you can't just be there entirely for selfish reasons.
Yes.
It's like you want to be a pioneer, like the astronauts, like you want to be a relational astronaut.
I like that. So you mentioned that there are like 10 potential facets to this kind of container. You know, I'm conscious of time. Maybe could you give us like 2 or 3 just as a taster of what some of those are?
Yeah. Well, one of them is commitment.
Yeah.
You know, one of them really is how are we committed to one another and to the possibility? And what does that take? Because it's together. I can't just be committed and you're not. That's not going to work really well. And we need to be also committed to the potential, because if we're not willing, when we get scared or we start to get up against where we've been before, or, you know, we've got to be willing to be challenged, to surrender, to be real and to be vulnerable and to not look good and to whatever. Yeah.
And in your context, what is there a commitment of, is it a year that you're asking people to, as a time commitment?
Yeah. What we do is we do a 3-day intensive where we really take people into the place where the consciousness is that this is happening in.
Yep.
And when people get there, it's vivid. It's compelling and it's vivid. It's beautiful and intense and demanding. And then from there, then they'll know whether or not they're willing to actually let that shape them, at least for a year.
Yeah. Okay, at least a year, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because it will change you. And because you're there with other people, you know, we have about 50 people in the course right now, and by the end of the year, we should probably have about 100. But it's a slow build because you can't just have anyone in there.
Yes. So, and is the model that you're adding new people to the existing group, or are you setting up okay.
New people add into the group every 4 months. And then they make a commitment for a year from there. And so this committedness and learning how to truly be committed and surrendered and open and willing and humble and real and, you know, and to let yourself be taken by something is very exciting, but it's not nothing.
It's not an easy ride, yeah.
No, and it's not just, it isn't just some interesting practices that take you someplace that is beautiful, and I think that's a good thing as well, but it really, you will be undone, like I was. I mean,
yes.
There's an undoing that one has to be interested in. So the commitment is one, and the other one is one of the biggest things that in the practices and the way that we work is influence, and becoming sensitive to and interested in what's, on a multidimensional level, like how are we influencing each other? And can I let you influence me? Can I let, like, the deepest dimensions of who we are literally alter and change something? Is the third that we are, like that when you and I come together, there's something else. Can we can you pay attention to that? What does it need? How do we feed back the influence that's occurring? Like, people don't even realize to the degree that they're very uninspiring.
I like that.
There's a kind of like laziness in relatedness.
Yes.
that we consider as normal.
I hear you.
And it's so boring. I mean, it's just so, I'm very correct. I'm from New York. So
Good.
talk about this. But it's just like, where's
Where's the juice?
Yes, to really demand, like if you're sort of like hanging back and I go, where are you? Come on, Jack,
Yeah. Wake up,
you.
dude.
I really want you. I want
Yes.
want what's possible in this moment together.
Yes.
And I don't know what that is, but I know when it's awakening and when
Yes.
we're both asleep.
Yes.
So we learn that because we're, for the most part, pretty asleep.
Yep.
And polite.
Yes.
And, don't interfere and don't, say this and then the sensitivity, because what's bad about it is you start getting very sensitive and then you start noticing how it is like everywhere.
You start noticing how boring you are. Yeah.
No, and just how much things aren't, how much isn't happening and what's possible between people.
Yes.
And that becomes more like from love, you just get more wanting of that and more capable of actually awakening that in your other relationships.
Yes. So let me ask you this. One of the things in integral and related circles, people talk a lot about polarities and managing polarities. And one of them that we might talk about is the self-other polarity.
Right.
How is your understanding of that in the context of what you're doing? Because it sounds like you're saying we're creating this space where that polarity is almost collapsed because we're trying to activate something between us that's bigger than both of us.
Well, here's the thing that's amazing. So one of the distinctions, one of the 10, so you asked for another one, is autonomy and communion.
Yes.
And quite honestly, merging is a kind of is like a baby state. It's a very egoic state where you sort of merge into the other and there's no differentiation.
Yes.
It's actually not an awakened state.
Yes.
It just can look like it.
Yes.
But it's not. And so autonomy, what happens is in this kind of connectivity, because the depth of you're seen so deeply and so essentially, kind of like at the core of who you are.
Yes.
Just when you're really in love, you feel like someone has really seen you.
Yes.
And touched you. And your true potential is being felt.
Yes.
Then the more that's occurring, you actually become more autonomous, more distinct, more particular.
Yes.
More particularly Jack. Do you know what I
Yes.
mean? It's like you're really who you are.
Yes.
And I'm really who I am. And the thing that's amazing is when you go into that state, you feel more yourself than ever before. And at the same time, the consciousness of feeling me simultaneously happens at the same time.
Yes.
It's like good Tantra. I mean, real Tantra is you feel yourself fully. You can feel your own orgasm, the other person's, and then something else, and then something else, and something else all at once.
Yes.
So your multidimensional sensitivity and awareness becomes more comprehensive. And the particularity, like one of the women, it was really funny in the New York thing. We were there for the snowstorm.
Oh yeah.
And she had to stay an extra night. And the Westminster Dog Show was at the hotel she was at.
Oh yeah.
With all these dogs, right? With like 150 dogs. And she said, because of the weekend, she felt this sense of this particularness that you feel with each person that's so acute. I mean, you actually feel like who they are, and it's exquisite. I mean, there's like this really refined sense of particularity. And she said she saw these dogs, and she was just like, oh my God, every dog is like so different. I mean, but she was feeling it like in her consciousness. She said it was just like exploding. Like all she could feel was all these very
distinct dog. Yeah.
essences of dog, which I thought was funny.
I like that.
Yeah.
So how does the not compromising anymore on kind of like who you really are, how does that differ in your work from, say, the focus on that in the landmark work? or is that a similar quality?
Well, I think not compromising, not from an ego standpoint, but from like an artist, like if you're a true artist.
Yes.
And you get so deeply connected to the stream of creativity and connection and your particular expression that you can't compromise just because you can't.
Yes.
It's more like that.
Yep.
So it's not a mental thing, and it doesn't come from a sense of will. It just becomes too painful.
Not to do it.
You just can't. And I think in second tier, to speak from integral terms, since one of the vectors of where we're working is really on second and third tier, is you're also dealing with people that have a bit less fear.
Yes.
So there's more of a naturalness to the more clear and aligned and connected you get, the less you're even interested in compromising, because why would you?
Yes.
Yes. you have a particular gift or particular part of the mandala to participate. If you're doing your life right, there's a particular piece that is yours anyway. So to not listen to that has no integrity.
Yes.
And doesn't allow you to actually be yourself and really do what you're here to do in the best way. So all of that, I think is really important.
Yeah. And where are people on that journey normally when they come into the work with you? Do you feel like most people are already kind of really strongly expressing their gift and who they are, or is that the kind of stretch up for them into the work that you're doing?
I think there's a bit of all of it. Obviously we have pretty successful people, so to do it, it's a year's commitment. It costs money, you have to go to New York, it's like a whole, there's a whole shakedown that happens just from that.
From the checkbook.
And that's intentional. It's actually intentional. But I would say different, there are people that are so like Peter and I, we were so open and willing. There's some people that are so strong in their willingness and their yes, that even if they're not there, like being in the trajectory, being in the field, the force field of the Evolutionary Collective and the space and consciousness that's already very strong, it starts to line things up and attract things. I also find that I think for people, it's so much more powerful to be with a powerful, awake group of other people that are aligned, because it pulls things into your life.
Yes.
You can't do by yourself. So we have awesome people. When people introduce, but it's also with humility. Everybody's very human, and a lot of people think, oh, I don't know if I belong here. They have like that whole thing, which is healthy. But the willingness and the commitment and the desire to jump in and be there and really engage fully, which is another one of the mutualities that is necessary, right? Full engagement. It all seems to work out, and people are willing to be courageous and, just go for it.
Cool.
So, there is, I guess, a certain amount of that from Landmark that I have. I just, I don't suffer fools really well.
Landmark plus New York,
plus New York. So Jeff and I are a good team, because he's so loving and he's so brilliant and so beautiful. So we actually have the masculine feminine
that's
as
cool.
a teaching thing, and that helps a lot, I think.
So let's imagine that there are there's a couple or one part of a couple that are looking at this and they're like, this sounds interesting, I want to know more. And let's just say for the moment that they're not about to jump into committing a year with you, but let's say they want to try something on. What would you recommend if they're saying, okay, look, I feel like I've got a bit boring, you've got a bit boring, let's inspire each other more, or like how to, other than awareness and kind of really wanting to pursue that possibility with a sense of integrity and commitment. Are there any kind of easy exercises or things that will kind of let people try this on a bit more, or kind of flex that muscle a bit more?
Well, I mean, my strongest suggestion is go to the website. If people sign up, there's a lot of content as far as blogs and audios, and like you said, I do the Evolutionary Collective conversations. There's tons of things they can listen to, that talk.
You've had some really great people on there, so I would encourage people to go to that.
Yeah. So, and then actually the next one I'm about to do on the 26th with Ellen Daly, who's my co-writer for the book, Evolution, will be speaking exactly about this whole domain of just relatedness. And so that could be useful. So that's on the 26th. Tuesday. So, but the other thing is they could do is I haven't taught an online course for over a year, but I will be doing one in May and June. So there'll be a 7-week online course that people can jump into that's, doesn't cost a fortune, and they can listen to it or get on it together. And it's called Weevolution, Unleashing the Transformative Power of Relatedness. And they'd get the downloads and be able to practice together. And, I think people can do it from anywhere in the world. And I think that's probably a good place to start.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah.
So one other perspective on this, sometimes people, if they're going to push through that fear and they're going to be in a more vulnerable space with someone, is there any danger of people feeling like that can compromise perhaps the intimacy in their intimate relationship if they're going into this very kind of vulnerable, intimate space with other people? Do you have any kind of protocol or suggestion for people around that? Or is that purely a case of saying that's really your fear talking? But I know that sometimes people worry that when they get, sort of psychologically intimate, that there can sometimes be this sort of sexual piece that can kind of come into that even unwittingly.
Well, it's interesting. There's something about, and it may just be where Jeff and I come from, because we're very clean.
Yes.
We're very, very clean there.
Yeah.
Like I'm like super sane there.
Yeah.
And so is Jeff. So the way in which the work is done, there's the integrity of it is so pure that there seems to be allowed, like you get this experience of this sort of multiple beloveds, like you go much deeper. But then the particularity of your lover, of the one that you have a karmic relationship with, somebody you've made a commitment to, that you actually bring that to them. So as long as they're not resisting, they love you. I mean, it actually takes things deeper.
Yes.
And that's really beautiful. I mean, and you also feel when there's an abundance of that feeling of connectivity with other women and men, and it's like you realize, oh, I get it. Like that's how humans can be.
Yes.
And then you can actually feel the other levels that would be appropriate, whether or not you should be a business partner with someone or a best friend or a lover. I mean, you can actually sense into what's appropriate in a relationship, not just intimacy equals being sexually turned on.
Yeah.
Because that's the distortion of our society.
Yes.
I mean, that's how bad we are. I mean, that's how starving we are, is there's so little real contact that when you finally feel seen by someone, you think you're in love with them.
Yes.
So there's a real healing around that. And discrimination. You start to have real discrimination because we're so starving, we're so young, and we're so uninformed as far as experientially how it can be with other people.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I get that you're really encouraging people just to notice how much they actually make contact with people in the course of their day-to-day.
And that's the higher order. So our real commitment is not to doing courses. I mean, the commitment is to facilitating, because I feel like something's wanting to happen.
Yes.
A new paradigm in human relatedness.
Yeah.
And that's really the point. I mean, it's period. I mean, and we're listening. The whole thing is designed for us to continuously be on the edge and listening for what's needed, what's wanted, how do we turn? Just like Peter and I were, we kept listening because we didn't know what we were doing. We were like listening for what it wanted.
Yes.
And so we're doing that in a collective level, and people that are there are actually committed, like we said, like, they're like astronauts. they're excited about being on the leading edge of something.
Yes.
And facilitating something, and obviously it has huge ramifications in their lives that are wildly beneficial, but it isn't about teaching them the 5 steps to finding their soulmate.
Yes.
And some people have, there's a woman that's in the course who's never been married, she's like over 50. She's in love. She's like pulled in, people are like pulling in appropriate love from outside, from someplace else. But it's kind of like the more aligned you are, the more those things start to happen.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely.
You
Yes.
don't have to figure it out or make a plan or, write it in your journal.
Yes. Yeah, one of the things I like about your vibe is that it seems that you're kind of bringing the sort of the love and the power together in some way. So it's not just a sort of sentimental language of kind of a sort of kind of yummy emotional space without the kind of like directness of like, no, I really want to see you. Hey, you're showing up in this way, or I'm not experiencing you as authentic or powerful or whatever. So it's sometimes I feel in the personal development space there can be a bit of a separation between those things. There's the people who are very strong on the kind of what do you want to have happen? How can you show up in that power? And then there's the kind of like love, surrender, unconditionality, the new age, and it feels like you're really bringing a higher order of coherence to both those things, which is fantastic.
Thank you. And there's one other piece too, because we have a lot of brilliant, successful men in our group. Very cool. And so and women as well. But there's also, we have pentas, we have like groups of 5 that work ongoingly together. And so there's also an opportunity for the mind. I love thinking and brilliance and, like being on the edge of where culture is going and inquiring into things and discovering things together.
Yes.
So that the whole thing, I've taught the Enneagram, it's the head, the heart, and the belly.
Yes, it is.
The whole thing. And, that people are empowered in their lives to be more successful, to be more of why they're here.
Yes.
Is also critically important. It isn't enough to just feel like someone sees who you are. You also have to continue to develop.
Yes. Yes.
And that's what's inspiring. So, part of it is people really inspiring one another. And I think we need that. I think we get lazy. I think sort of left to our own devices, we're sort of humans are always a little bit lazy anyway. So we kind of need that encouragement.
Yeah, we need the container and the.
It's true.
Yeah.
I do. I feel uplifted by the people that we're with.
Yes. One of the things that I know you have as language is multi-dimensional awareness. This sort of idea of being really in touch with your own interiority and also in touch with other people's internal states.
Right.
How do you best read someone's internal state? Like, do you need to kind of probe people for that, or is that really just a kind of sensing where people are? Because often the hardest thing to get a real handle on is someone else's internal state. You can see their, in integral speak, you can see the behavior, you can see the external, but to know what's really going on inside, that's a bit more profound.
Well, it's interesting. Everyone can do it. Because we're not really that separate.
Yes.
We're just not. But most people are used to being inside their own little bubble. So the practices and many of the things that we do and the fact that you're in it for a year, people that have always been like, oh no, I'm not going to know, and I'm not going to be able to do this. The fact that it's so often, you're working and doing that continuously.
Yes.
It's very exciting to actually discover that you can.
Yeah.
And then eventually that something opens, as that kind of membrane starts to thin of believing that you're separate.
Yes.
And, becoming more transparent, more honest, more open, more vulnerable, more real also opens the membrane, right? Because otherwise I don't want you in here.
Yes.
Not only can I not go over there, but I don't want anybody over here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we work on that. But eventually, people have reported, and I know this is my experience, is I call it the internet.
I've heard of that.
The internet is where there's a certain amount of your consciousness that's kind of tracking, where you can actually feel the different people you're connected to, what's happening in the field. I mean, it starts actually open so that part of what I think is important is that we actually break through to a different kind of consciousness so that becomes more normal.
Yes.
Instead of every once in a while when you do some exercise,
Yeah.
So and people have said they feel like they're becoming like they have less skin, like they're more naked, and there are obviously more sensitive.
Yes.
Like for her to experience that, even with the dogs, it was like this influx of particularity, which was a consciousness. It wasn't that she was paying attention. She was just open.
Yes.
And so part of the year and beyond is to really change people's consciousness, like for real.
Yeah.
Like really,
Yes.
Because to me, that's what matters.
Yes.
Is that you have human beings that are really changed. Not that you've learned how to do some cool things together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then you're also more open to all information. Do you know what I mean? There's a sense of being more connected to the future and to different imprint. It's like a creative, creative visionaries are always connected to something that's not here.
Yes.
And so that's another dimension that we're working on and opening up for people so that becomes strong.
Yeah. 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 There's all the difference, I guess, between what you can experience in a particular practice at a particular time of the day and what you can experience in a more ongoing fashion, even if you need to, practice it in the first context in order to bring it into the second.
Yeah.
So we're coming to the end of our time together. If people are resonating with you and what you're saying, I know you've flagged a couple of opportunities. I don't know if there's anything else you want to let people know that you're up to, and maybe just to give them the website name so they're clear where to find you.
Well, I mean, the best way is if they go to the website evolutionarycollective.com, they can sign up and get a free download of a conversation, the usual, and but that keep them just in the loop as far as knowing what's happening, receiving the audios and the blogs when they're there. We try to keep it to a minimum, but they can stay connected to the conversation and listen to things or engage as their interest is.
Yeah. Super. That's evolutionarycollective.com.
So, I like the way you say it, evolutionary.
Well, I've been warned that I'm starting to kind of lose some of the English accent and it's coming a bit more American. I can't even work out where. So, final question: where do you see that this is going? Both kind of in your work and the kind of the bigger, the scale of kind of the all. Are you encouraged by these new forms of relatedness coming in? What do you sense is in store for us culturally?
Well, I have, because I'm 40 years older, like having from when I was
starting with the S stuff,
starting. The fact that what we did then, which didn't make any sense, actually made a difference.
Yes.
Like it really did. All the coaching schools, all that stuff came out of the work we did.
Yeah.
I mean.
Yeah.
So I actually have a lot of faith in this and in that there is, people are talking about the we space and unity and, we're pointing towards a different kind of consciousness yet again.
Yes.
So I have a lot of, and I think we're just at the beginning. We're just sort of like, bumping
feeling
around.
it out.
Dark. So I think 30 years from now, I have a lot of hope that human beings will be related from a much higher level of connectivity. And when we're connected, it's a lot. Then the creativity, you can't abuse something that you're connected to.
Mm. Yeah.
I mean, the what do they call, what's the law? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
The golden rule?
Golden rule. That's right. I was
Yeah.
thinking of law. The golden rule becomes alive
Yes.
because you can't enforce that. But if you're awake and you're awake and you're awake and you really feel each other and you're sensitive, there's things you just can't do. So I think that I have a lot of hope for the whole thing.
Yeah.
I just, the part I know how to do is the part I'm doing. And I figured the other people that are brilliant at all the other areas of how we all have to connect will do their job and we'll find our way.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, I love your idea that we've all got our own piece of the mandala that's ours, our unique gift. So thank you for sharing your unique gift with us today. I've been inspired by our conversation, so I'm really glad that we've had you on the show, and all the very best with the Evolutionary Collective. I hope it goes from strength to awakening to more strength and awakening. So,
thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Nice to talk to you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.